Welcome back, guys, and thanks again for joining us for tonight's virtual class. I'm Chris Hearn. I'm the West Tennessee Field Rep for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. This is something I really enjoy doing, this jug fishing, and I threw Trotline in there as well. And then people kind of group limb lines into the same thing, but it's going to be a fun discussion tonight. I'm looking forward to sharing what I've learned over the years with you guys. Also on the call tonight is Taylor Martin. He's the manager of the Hunting and Fishing Academy, and he's going to be running some of the background stuff and kind of coordinating the questions and things. Taylor, would you like to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit more about the Zoom function?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us this evening for this Trotline Jug Fishing 101. It is something me and Chris are pretty excited about. But tonight, I'm just going to be kind of sitting in the background, helping run Zoom and everything. Just so everybody knows, you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. So feel free to do whatever you need to do in your home. So while we talk about this, but we do want this to be interactive. That's what makes these fun, and it's what we really like doing. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Chris and I, make sure to put those in the Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen. That's the best way to ask us a question. But if you have anything else that you'd like to say to us or the group, you can use the chat function down there as well. And we may have a few pop-up questions come up through this just to kind of get a better idea of what everybody's experience is and stuff like that. But we'll let you know when those are coming up if we have any tonight. But other than that, that's all I got, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Taylor. I want to start off with just an overview of what we're going to discuss tonight. You know, there's a ton of videos out there about jug fishing and trotline fishing, and you can go to YouTube and you can watch these 30-minute videos that's probably going to be able to dive way more in depth of actually being out there and doing it. And I'm going to put some in the email that I'm going to share tomorrow. But tonight, I really want to just talk about what it is, talk about the ways to get started. We're going to talk about the species that you're going to catch when you're doing this. We're going to go over how to build jugs, how to build trot lines, and some of the better baits, depending on the impoundment you're in. And then I'm briefly going to touch on regulations, but the regulations that's around trot line and jug fishing is really, it can be kind of impoundment dependent. So in other words, each lake, depending on who it's managed by, whether that be TWRA or some of the different places, are going to have different rules around this type of fishing. But I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. And one good thing about jug fishing and really even trotline fishing is this is something that you can get into very cheap. You don't need expensive rods and reels. You don't need a trolling motor on your boat. You don't, it don't matter if you've got a kayak or if you've got a pontoon boat, you can go and enjoy this jug fishing, trotline fishing. So we'll start off by talking about the species that you can catch. And this is probably the most common species here in Tennessee, and that's the channel catfish. This is what's going to be stocked a lot of the times when we have our fishing events. This is what TWRA is going to stock when they do them. And that's probably how a lot of these small ponds and things get stocked at one point or another. But a channel catfish, they get up to around 10 pounds. That would be a pretty big one. You know, I think the record's probably on up there 20, 30 pounds. But as far as especially our smaller lakes and rivers, I'm going to say your average is going to be somewhere between 1 and 10 pounds. And they eat a variety of things. They eat worms, they eat liver, they eat shad, crawfish. They're probably one of the first ones that's going to eat things like a dip bait or a stink bait. There's cheese and there's different things that people can use. And we're going to go over some of those types of baits. But a channel really eats a lot of different stuff. And you're probably going to catch a few on accident, no matter which species you're targeting. The second one I wanted to cover is called a blue catfish. And these get really big. These can get upwards of 100 pounds. I know there was some documented, look, when I was doing my research, looked like 127 pounds on a rod and reel in one state. But normally when you're doing this in these local lakes, especially TWRA managed lakes, you will catch some blue catfish, but normally they're going to be I'm going to say your average is going to be about 5 to 6 pounds. That's not to say you can't catch a 40 or 50 pounder, but don't go out there setting your jugs out and be just disappointed when you don't catch a 40 or 50 pound blue cat. But they are out there and they can get that big. There's definitely some that big in the TVA chain of river there, Tennessee River system. And then the last one I'm going to cover is a flathead catfish. To back up, the blue catfish eats a lot of the same things that a channel catfish does. And then a flathead starts to be a little bit different. They primarily feed on live food. They spend a lot of their time during the day in deeper holes, just kind of hanging out, and then they're known to move more at night. They're a little bit more likely to be found in the rivers that's got a little bit of current than they are some of these lakes that don't have any kind of current to them. And these fish can get big as well. You can hear about them getting on up in that 70 and 80 pound range. But the reason they're worth mentioning, especially in this virtual class, is going back to them moving at night. That plays a factor on this jug fishing and trotline fishing, because especially trot lines, you can put those out, bait them out late in the evening, leave them out overnight, and then run them the next morning. So you're more prone to have hooks in the water during that time that flatheads are feeding. So that's why they are worth mentioning. And if you're going to go out and target flatheads, put live bait out late in the evening and go in and check them in the morning. That can also be done with jugs. And I'm going to go over a little bit of the difference here in just a minute, but you just got to keep in mind that you have to run those at least once a day, and there's a chance that a big flathead could take a jug, even if it's anchored, and pull it off. But we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Before we dive into actually talking about the type of jug fishing rigs and trotline fishing rigs, does anybody have any questions about the species or anything about their kind of annual life cycle or what they eat? This is an illustration of just I think that's even a milk jug there that somebody's used. And what you have is it's tied to the main jug, literally a jug, hence the jug fishing thing. And it's got a main line that comes down to a sinker, and then you got a hook with bait down below it. That's how I personally do mine. That means that jug is going to be free floating. It's not attached to the bottom. So you're going to have to kind of keep track of where they're at, especially if you were putting them in a place that's got current. Most of your jugs are going to move at the same pace. And when you get ready to run them in a few hours or a couple hours, hour, whatever it is, you can pretty well find them all. But if you get a fish and it goes up current, all the other ones are floating down current, you can see where they could get separated. So the other option is to use some kind of a bigger weight. The video I'm sharing with you guys in the morning is where people actually use Dixie cups and Quickcrete and put, you can put a fencing staple or something like that in it before it sets up. Once it dries, you tie to that staple and then come up the line. You've got a leader that comes off your main leader to put your hook on, and then it goes on up to the jug. Now with this, they're not going to float. So it is just a couple different ways of doing it. I'm going to go through several ways of building them, but there's no right or wrong answer. If you ask 10 different people that do this, they're going to give you 10 different answers. But I do want to give you a few tips. One, use some kind of a color that's going to stand out on the water. I know some states require it to be white. I don't think Tennessee has any kind of a law that has a certain color restriction on the color of jugs. Oranges, whites, probably white's the best one. If you got something brown or black on a, dark colored water, it's probably not going to show up as well. You have to have your name, address, and your TWRA identification number on the jugs. And basically that's just a way that, if one was lost, one, they could get it back to you. And two, it's just a way of them being able to track and make sure that they are being ran, because obviously that would be a waste of the resource if you just put out a jug and then, didn't go back and check it. Some other tips is using reflective tape if you was using them at night. So if you've got reflective tape and you're running your jugs, you can shine a spotlight. They're going to glow in the dark and make them easy to find. And then also one neat trick, and I haven't utilized this on my jugs, but I'm going to start doing it, is labeling the jugs by depth. So in other words, you could have, let's say the reservoir will allow you to have 20 jugs. Well, I could have some that's 6 foot down, some that's 8 foot down, some that's 10 foot down. And then either I can throw them all out together and then keep track as I catch fish of which depth is working best. So then I'm learning and I can repeat that. So if I throw out 20 jugs and I've got, let's say we throw 18, so I can do easy math, and we got 3 different depths and we got 6 of each, and I'm catching all of them at 6 foot, then, the next time I go, there might be a good chance maybe I should do more at 6 foot. Or probably the way I would do it more often would be I would throw the 6 foot ones out on the shallow side of a lake or maybe back in a creek. I would put the 8 foot ones out a little bit more, and I might put the 10 foot ones out in the deep water near the center. So there's a lot of ways you can do it, but that is a neat little trick. So here pictured is what a lot of people are going to when they're building these jugs. And what that is a pool noodle. And then they're using a piece of PVC, putting it through it, capping it on both sides. You can either tie to the PVC. A lot of people are using the actual little screw in, like a garden hook on one end, and tying the line to it. One good thing about these is you can wrap it around that styrofoam and then hook it into itself. So it's real easy to keep from getting tangled with the other ones and things like that. Again, there's a million different ways. I personally have got 2 sets of jugs. I've got, and I'm going to cover more of this here in a minute, but it's basically a big fish type jugs with big hooks if I'm going after some real big fish with big bait. And then I've got some that I've got, just regular small hooks, like if I was going to go just try to catch a bunch of 2 and 4 pound fish. And then occasionally I get on a reservoir that don't have a limit. So, if it's a 20 jug limit and I'm really wanting to execute that, then I'm going to put them all out. So pretty often when I go fishing, and especially when I'm looking for fish to eat, I'm going to carry my jugs because I can spend 5 minutes putting them out, go fish with a rod and reel, come back and check them, and I'm just adding to my bag. I'm adding to my cooler, by running those. And it's literally 15, 20 minutes of my time when you do it like that. So it's just some cool tips. The obvious thing is, especially with these, if you get a bite and you've got a fish attached to that jug and you're out on your boat or however you're looking at them, you're going to see that thing standing up, or you're going to see it moving, and then you're going to go into it and pull it up with your hands or use something to hook it and pull it up. And then I think it's very important to have a dip net, especially when you're catching bigger fish. Pull them up, dip them. It's all good. All right, guys, we're going to go on into trot lines. And I thought this was a pretty good illustration of just a general trot line. This is the way most people do it. You wouldn't have to use that bleach bottle jug as a floating on the other end. You could have just let it kind of pull it tight and just use an anchor. If you use that jug to make one end float, you can obviously kind of get it up off the bottom, get those hooks up in the water column. So there's also, you could have used 2 jugs. So in other words, it's not going to be attached to anything on the bank. It's just going to have an anchor on one end and a jug, however many hooks you got, and then another jug and another anchor. So you could have put it out near the center of a lake. The only thing is, there is probably more rules around trot lines than it is around jugs. So, and we're going to cover some of that in a minute. But the reason being is you really have to have those marked. You could imagine if you had a skier or something like that come in and fall in the water and get entangled in one of these hooks, how bad that would be. So that's why they're a little bit more scrutinous on their laws for trot lines. As far as building trot lines, I would encourage you for at least your first one to just buy one of these pre-made kits, or at least the kits that include everything. The law in Tennessee, the hooks have to be 24 inches apart. That's how they're going to come. If you buy the stainless steel clips and all the swivels and things like that. So if you do decide to eventually make one, that is one law in Tennessee that you have to abide by. These I see them at Walmart. Academy's got them, Bass Pro, and you can get as fancy with them as you want. But what you're looking at picture there, I think that's two different brands, but they're all going to work pretty well the same. The only thing I do want to encourage is when you have your main line and you come down with your small leaders, is you do want to have some kind of a swivel, because if a catfish is pretty big on spinning as kind of their defense mechanism, if you do that, it will twist that line up or possibly untwist the braid on the trot line cord. And then also, even if you were in some current with a big bait on there, that current can cause it to kind of helicopter around. And as it twists, that leader gets shorter and shorter. So eventually it would pull all the way up against your main line and might keep a fish from biting it. So that's just a little tip. I like this picture as well. This is just kind of an illustration, and this is probably when I'm running trot lines, what my trot lines are going to look like. I'm normally going to tie them off to some kind of a piece of wood or a limb or a tree or something. You can mark where you put it. If you got a good memory and you recognize trees and things like that, then you can obviously come right back to it. There's a lot of apps now. You can mark it on your phone. The main thing is you got to keep track of where you put them, because that don't do you much good. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're not having a float on it, if you put this out, let's say this one that's pictured, and that's on the, let's say, Hatchie River, and we get a 3-inch rain overnight, and you go back the next morning, the water's come up 3 foot, there's a chance you could struggle to get to your line. So just keep that in mind when you're putting them out on waters that really fluctuate. This next photo is something that I think is probably about as important as anything. This is probably a commercial fisherman's set, as many as he's got there, and there is a hook limit, and I'll go over that here in just a minute. On trot lines, it's just a sport with a sport fishing license. If you had a commercial license, you could use more hooks. But so the way that these trot line baskets are set up is to keep those hooks separated. So the way that would work, it really helps to have a 2-man team in a boat. You got one running the motor, one putting the trot line, baiting and putting it out. So you're going to tie one end, and then you're going to start working your way around that thing. You pull out a hook, you stick a bait on it right quick, you pull a little bit, move the boat, get to the next hook, so on and so forth till you get to the end. When you get to the end, whichever method you use, whether that be dropping a weight or dropping a weight in a bottle, then we're going to do that. But this basket like this is really a good way, especially if you're running more than one, to keep those nice and neat and separated. If you try to pile them all in a 5-gallon bucket, it's not going to work. Now you can take and just use a 5-gallon bucket, and instead of using these little slats like that, slits in it, you just make the hook on top of your 5-gallon bucket. But I still think you would be best off if you had access to a hacksaw or something like that to go ahead and cut you a little groove, and that's going to keep that hook from moving around. And then the last piece of advice, if you find I know a lot of like veterinary medicines are shipped in styrofoam coolers. I think that's probably one of the better options as well, because you can put that trot line in there and then hook your hooks around the edge, and that's going to keep it real nice and neat. So next time you see one of those little cheap coolers like that, or you could buy one, it's probably worth grabbing one up if you were going to build some trot lines. So we're going to move on into the types of baits, and there is a billion types of catfish bait out there. And I started to just fill this slide up with a million different pictures and just talk about the variety, but I've decided to just hit on a few of the ones. I'm going to leave out I've left out some of the more important ones would be chicken soaked in red Kool-Aid. A lot of people do that. Buy a boneless chicken breast, soak it in red Kool-Aid, slice it up into small squares. That's a pretty good jug and trotline bait. Cheese, I think there might even be somebody on this virtual class with a few dozen pounds of cheese. You can put it in pantyhose and different things, put a hook through it. Cottonseed meal is another one that can be put in pantyhose. There's a lot of baits out there. Now, that being said, I'm going to stick with probably the 4 most common and maybe even the most effective. So to start, that stink bait, that magic bait type stuff is just a square. It takes a little bit different hook. You kind of need a spring on your hook to be able to get that to stay on. But it's something that if you're trying to, real quickly go fishing and you ain't got time to gather up some of these other types of baits, this is something I know you can grab at Walmart. You're primarily just going to catch catfish. You're probably going to catch just channel and blue cat, primarily channel. With chicken livers, there's probably been more catfish caught on chicken livers than anything out there. And for about $2, you can buy a tub of chicken livers. You don't need a whole one on there. You can cut it in half with some scissors, put it on the hook. Again, the good thing about something like chicken livers is it's not going to have brim and things like that. It's going to nibble at it and eat it off. Again, you're fishing for probably blue cat and channel cat. And then we're going to move on. That they're pictured as night crawlers. Don't necessarily have to be a night crawler. There's a bunch of different versions out there, as I've learned. Walmart's got green night crawlers, red night crawlers, regular night crawlers. They've got what they call, I think, some kind of wiggler. They've got red worms. They've got a ton of different ones, and it really don't matter. But if you go to these smaller type worms, you might need to put more than one on the hook. Thread that worm on the hook about with a little bit of the end sticking off both sides, and it's kind of moving in the water. That could attract something like a flathead if you're in the right reservoir, and then you're also going to catch some blues and cat and channel cat. The only problem I see with worms is it's very prone for like brim and other panfish to nibble at your bait and get it off the hook basically before catfish ever comes along. So if you're in a place that don't have many brim, maybe worms as an option, but generally I'm going to steer away from that just because it don't do you any good to bait them out if something's going to get the bait off before you get back there to run them. And then I saved the best for last. Skipjack is by far my favorite to bait really about anywhere. Crawfish is another good one if I can get them, especially in river systems, but on general lakes and ponds, a skipjack herring, which can be caught, you can buy them. They can be sold, I believe, but you can catch them on what's called a sabiki rig, which is just a little small chain of flies. And I'll try to add that to the email for tomorrow, but you go below the dams in swift water, or sometimes just out on generally in the river, and you can catch these little skipjack herring, and you cut them up. So the way I store mine, I put them inside a Walmart bag and freeze them individually. When I get ready to go to the lake and I know I'm going to be running jugs, I'm getting out one skipjack. One skipjack, unless you're baiting for really big fish, is going to get you through to bait 20 jugs twice. Let's just say with, double your thumb size chunks on there. So that's one of my favorite baits. If you guys got any questions about where to find them and how to catch them, I can answer those. But the biggest thing about baits in general, one, experiment with different baits. If you're on a reservoir that requires that will allow you to put, let's say, we'll go back to 18 jugs. Well, why not put skipjack on 6, chicken liver on 6, and stink bait on 6, and then keep track of which ones you put on what. And then again, you're learning that reservoir. And then the last thing on bait for me just remember this, and this applies for any fish, whether you're largemouth fishing, smallmouth fishing, catfishing, big baits equal big fish. You got to be prepared. You got to have big hooks for big baits. So like I said, I run 2 sets of jugs. I've got one that's got 10 mustad hooks on it, and I got some that's got 2 on. So depending on where I'm going and what I'm going after is going to dictate how big I cut my bait and how big of hooks I use. So Aaron asked about going over catching skipjack, and this is so where I'll just tell you where I catch mine. It's no big secret. So I live in West Tennessee, and I'm about an hour and 10 minutes from Pickwick Dam. Pickwick Dam, as they generate current or generate electricity, they have an outflow on the downside that creates a bunch of current. If you've ever been to a dam, you've seen the bowls and you've seen all this. Well, normally right below those bowls is normally a big congregation of skipjack. They can be caught pretty much year round. Sometimes of the year are better than others. Sometimes you'll go, and these sabiki rigs I'm referring to, and I can't believe I didn't put one in this presentation, but they have a chain of small flies on them, and there will be about 6 on it. And when you throw it out there, if there's really a bunch of skipjack around, you can catch 2 or 3 per cast. So you can get a lot of bait quick. One thing about catching skipjack is there is 100 fish creel limit for skipjack. So you can't have but 100 on you, which is a lot. If you catch 100 skipjack, you're set for bait for a long time. I hope and this is done from the bank. Now you can run a boat up there into those bowls and throw them rigs out there and catch them like that. But to be honest, if you live close to a dam system that's got them, just go down there with a 5-gallon bucket or a cooler, throw them out there and take them off. And again, I haven't researched it. I've never bought a skipjack because I've always been able to catch mine. But I know that, for instance, Lake Graham, I do believe, was selling skipjack for like $2 a piece. And they had them froze, and you could just go in there and get them. So, and with that being said, there's probably some bait shops out there that could have them. And I hope I answered that to where you kind of know what I'm talking about. Again, million YouTube videos out there that can go over catching bait like that, and you can catch, and I'm just touching on skipjack, but there's a lot of different herons and shad and things like that could be cut up that you can catch. Some of them you can catch in a throw net, gizzard shad, yellowfin, things like that. One little tidbit about a sabiki rig in general is they normally don't have barbs on. And the reason being is you want to be able to easily get them bait fish off. So a lot of the times, if you've got 2 or 3 on the hook, you can get them over the top of your cooler and just kind of shake them, and they'll just come right off. Now, skipjack, I will tell you, it'll get up. I've seen some, 15 inches, 14 inches. I've seen some almost 2 pounds. They can get big, but in general, you're going to catch them a little bit bigger in your hand. So I want to touch a little bit on the rules and regulations around trot lines and jugs. And there's really no other way around it. So I'm fixing to do a little bit of reading. I attached in the email tomorrow a link to the e-regs through the state site, and you can go in there and read in more detail. But so trot lines consist of a main line with drop lines to single hooks. The drop lines cannot be closer than 24 inches together. So I covered that a little bit. There is no limit on catfish except for only one can exceed 34 inches. Trot lines and jugs must be tagged with your landowners, with the owner's name, address, and TWRA identification number. Trot lines attached to the bank must be tagged on the line within 5 feet of the bank. So if you're tying them off to a tree like the one we have pictured, within 5 foot up there, you got to have your tag. If you use the jug system like we talked about, got to have it within 5 foot of either end. So the holder of a sport fish license may use one or more trot lines, not having a combination of more than 100 hooks. So that's where I was talking about, in that picture that had the trays, that's probably a commercial fisherman. But on your regular sports fishing license, you're going to be able to use up to 100 hooks. And that's a lot. I mean, if you put 100 hooks out, you got your work cut out for you, because you got to think that's 24 inches. I ain't going to do the math on how long that is, but that's a bunch of feet of trot lines that you're going to run at least once a day. Sport anglers are limited to 50 jugs, no matter where you're at. That's a state limit, and they can only have one hook. And then let's see, they got to be ran at least one time a day. They're prohibited within 1,000 yards of any TVA or Corps of Engineer dams. And then trot lines cannot be set within 100 yards of the mouth of any river, creek, or slough. So that's a lot of regulations there. But basically a lot of it is just safety stuff, and you also don't want to be in a situation where, I think a lot of the rules around the mouths of creeks and sloughs, I might be wrong about this, but there would be a chance of snagging something that was not intended to be on your hook, as it moves in and out of that sluice. And then this next one, this is way more than I could ever go over in a virtual class, but I'm going to just give you an example of what some of the different individual reservoir rules would be. But you're going to have to look up whichever one is, you're planning on fishing, but I can real quickly just touch on it. So, for example, Allen Branch Pond and Chilliwacky Pond at Cherokee WMA are closed to jugs and trot lines. Barge Lake on lands between the lakes, closed to trot lines and lib lines, but jugs are permitted from October 1st to March 21st. Beach River Watershed Development Authority, which is over here in West Tennessee around the Lexington area, has a 20 jug per boat limit. Trot lines are prohibited. We'll skip on down this list. This is on that link I'm sending you guys tomorrow. And then you can also find more information through your interactive fishing regulations as well. But TWRA lakes, trot lines and limb lines are prohibited. From April 1st through September 30th, jug fishing is prohibited on Saturdays, Sundays, Memorial Day, Independence Day, and Labor Day. And then on days that are open to jug fishing, each boat is limited to 10. So I do fish a lot of TWRA lakes. That's why I keep bags of 10. And then if I go somewhere that's got a bigger limit, I've got 2 bags of 10. I can throw them in there and roll. The obvious reason for not allowing jug fishing on the busy days in the summer and on the holidays is just a safety risk, and it goes back to so many recreational boaters being out there, and you just don't want to take a chance of somebody getting entangled in something like that. So just make sure that before you go and you do this jug fishing or trot line fishing, just check that individual reservoir's rules and regulations. You can do that through Go Outdoors Tennessee. And that brings us to the end. I know that there's a million things out there about the subject that I've not covered. If you guys have any questions, you can ask them, but hopefully you'll also get some use out of the videos that I've attached in the email tomorrow, where they're actually walking through some of the scenarios of actually putting them out, running them, and building. All right, guys, if you don't have anything else, I'll let you get back to enjoying your night. I appreciate y'all joining us. And you'll be receiving a recording of this virtual class, so you can go back and look at some of the stuff I covered. You'll also be getting some resources that I've covered, the videos, the link to the e-regs, a link to Go Outdoors Tennessee to buy your license. And if there's anything else, we're always accessible. You can reach us through email or text. It's on our website at tnwf.org. But thank you guys for joining us.